So, well. It's fantastic to be here with you today, Caroline. You are on a mission. You are on a mission to transform the way CEOs think about the world and, most of all, act in a world that's being shaken up. It has been for years, and it's going to get even more complex, more demanding. Whether it's the age of AI, whether it's about climate change or really climate challenge, societal collapse, in your brilliant, stimulating, provocative, and very, very practical book, AfterShock to 2030. That's the short title. And clearly this is an endeavor you deeply care about. I know that from our interactions ourselves, but it comes through in the book. And you also share your own personal journey over a few years, if not decades, if I can be cheeky enough to say that. So in this episode, we are going to talk about not only the shocks, the world around us, the context we're operating in, but specifically, what does it take to be a higher performing, more responsible, more sustainable, authentic systems leader? But before we dig into that important topic, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. It's really lovely to be here.
Fantastic. So I'm going to quote you to begin with. I have read the book a number of times, actually. It's so stimulating and it's a challenging read. Not because it's badly written, it's beautifully written, but it's like, oh, wow. I had visceral reactions at different stages. And I know that's a topic you may talk about in terms of how leaders manage themselves. But you say, and I quote, our addiction to unsustainable growth, globalization, and an always on, always available progress, fueled by the constant dopamine rewards of convenience, is pushing us to the brink of destruction. Just take a moment, everyone. You don't need to. You wrote it. Take a moment just to hear that. What's the alternative? What should we be doing instead?
You're right. Those words are really, really hard to hear and read. And I have to say it took a long time for me to be able to work out those words that really enabled me to be able to communicate, let's use the term authentically, because it's actually quite hard to say those words without feeling like you're going to be mocked or criticized or told that, really, Caroline, you're on some kind of crazy juice. So, I've been working quite hard to get to this point where I felt very grounded in the words that I used. So the antidote to all of this is, and it's going to sound really basic and it's going to sound really trite, because I remember when I had these big issues and big thoughts and pretty much feeling despair with understanding that entire system, I was told to read a book. A very particular book. And the TLDR on that is, the antidote to it is hope. And hope is a really hard thing to find. And it feels often like it's just nonsense, because it's like we're so used to driving at 1,000 miles an hour in our minds to feel accomplished. That's the dopamine hits. And when we don't get it anymore, because there are all of these compounding, challenging, interconnected systems all happening at the same time, we're not able to achieve what we used to be able to achieve. So the first thing I say is hope. And, if people need let's say an amuse-bouche before reading the book, I've actually got the book that I was told to read. It's called Active Hope. It's right here. And it's written by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone and Naomi Klein, author of This Changes Everything, whom I really rate and also recommend in my book list. Recommends the book because of the grief that's associated with everything that is happening on a global and a local and a mindset perspective. And it's just absolutely imperative to take that step of hope. Now,
before we go on, I'm going to be cheeky and interrupt. Before we go on, because that's such an important point. From your own experience of working with senior leaders, your research you've done, what's your sense of how much people get the picture you just sort of described and the need for hope?
People don't get the picture. And I had to go to MIT twice to understand the picture, as well as deciding to become a coach over 11 years ago to understand the full picture. So it's a process. And not everybody is able to handle that emotional, psychological, economic, existential reality all at once. It is overwhelming. I have to say. So to understand what I kind of call the triad, which is, to be able to understand the climate, the AI, the societal aspect, you got to think about all three of them pretty much at the same time. We don't really, unfortunately, have much choice in the matter. We could wait. You could take as long as I did, which is, well over 11 years to be able to put everything down into a book, because really there was no choice for me. I had to get this done. And a lot of other writers have been doing that since the 70s to give us the warnings of the world that we are creating. So in a way, we have to fast track our understanding very, very quickly, and it requires an accelerated force that really we haven't been able to comprehend before.
So it's a lack of awareness and understanding, as well as feelings of overwhelmed and perhaps it's just too big, too complex, can't deal with it. It's both. So it's lack of understanding and the reaction to it.
And there's a lot of outrage. We are all grieving, as you know, that we know. We just have to look at the news, and maybe the clients that we work with that are involved in the tech space and how they're being regarded as broliarchs, and all of those that kind of negative language, and the kind of shift that's happening right under our noses. And the issue is that we've got all of these profound changes, and people feel hopeless, which is why hope is really important, because with hope and trying to find some semblance of hope, which is going to be different for everybody, it enables you to be able to connect with other people in a way that is going to be able to move you forward faster than if you, complain, grieve, continue down outrage therapy, on social media or with friends, or when you're out at the pub having a beer. It really requires finding some kind of solution.
So well put. If you had to pick just three of the seismic changes that you've just been talking about, what would be in your top three?
What would be in my top three in the seismic changes? That one has to learn. That's a good question. And I think it's very hard to be able to understand which one is going to be, because everybody's going to be on their own journey. For me, it's always been climate, and I've been very married to tech ever since I tried programming on the C64 and failed abysmally when I was about 9 years of age. So, I was interested in tech. I was interested in climate from a very early age. I was interested in systems for a very early age. So I think for each of us, we have to look back at ourselves. And I write about this in the book, which is have a chat with your 7-year-old self and try and work out what it is that was most interesting to you at that particular point in time, and explore it with that particular lens and that particular approach.
And if you were having a conversation with a CEO and she or he was saying, I've heard about your book, I may have even read it, and they were actually up for the challenge. I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful? What would be some of the most difficult or uncomfortable truths that they may be holding that you would invite them to reconsider?
Well, I think I'm going to have to put myself on the line here on your podcast.
Please do, in all respects. Ba-bum.
Ba-bum. And I had to understand from my own perspective that I'm not an expert in any area. I am not the all-knowing, all-seeing person in my particular area. There are many different people in one's community, and that we can hire as a consultant, as a coach, as a therapist to get to a particular point. There's no cookie cutter that's going to fix this in any particular way. So the reality is that a CEO, like most intelligent people that have gotten to their position of influence, power, And they have to understand that, yeah, they are supposed to be the person that is going to know, that should know everything, but they need to be in a situation and be able to confess to themselves, I don't know. I need to find out how to do it. And within my team, whether or not you've got 5 people in your team or 50,000, how can you do some pretty radical listening and develop extreme accountability all at the same time, alongside AI, to ensure that you're able to accelerate at a pace that will create the kind of stickiness in our minds where we no longer feel so hopeless and helpless, and then we can find that hope all over again.
And as they're doing that, and that sounds a great way to start. What if they have those moments where they think, yeah, I know this is the right thing to do, but I've got my short-term results to deliver. I've got shareholders, investors really shouting at me saying, come on, we're in a difficult economic environment. The world is, very fragmented. So focus on the business, focus on the numbers. What do you say to them?
Well, fortunately, you've interviewed the person that I'm about to talk about, Paul Polman. And when he was CEO of Unilever, he spoke to his board and said, hey, give me a chance. I'm going to be turning things around. And he did. So, there are examples out there, some really credible examples. When he was the CEO, he didn't have those kind of pressures, but he could see what was coming. Just like we can see what's coming and where we are and how things are accelerating at an all too uncomfortable pace. So I think I know it requires a lot of faith. It requires having a really good relationship, for example, with the board, and to be able to create a sense of exploration with the board on what the alternatives are.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And as they do that, so they're inviting them to, if you like, take a leap of faith, individually, collectively, listen more, explore, understand. That's all that, if you like, the new. As a strategist, I'm always keen to understand the old. What do they need to leave behind in their mindset or their playbook as they do that, if only to create the space for the new?
Yeah, I'm smiling so hard, as you can see, David, because the leaving behind bit is the most painful. Because think about, from a neuroplasticity perspective, from an ego perspective, what got us here won't necessarily get us there. And we are so deeply attached. I am, you are, maybe lots of people are deeply attached to the data, the knowledge, the legacy systems that we inherited that we know really, really well. And we're able to add on to, that infrastructure really, really well, or the scaffolding or the foundation really, really well. And we know how to make that incremental change. But the challenge is, as you well know, we're in a very different time. I kind of call it a wartime. I wasn't that explicit about it in the book, but it is a wartime. And our enemy, if I can call it this, is the impact of climate, geopolitics, AI, though AI is actually going to be our friend here. We're going to be able to work with AI to create the results that we need from an existential perspective. Will it impact us from a profit perspective? Yes, if handled wisely. Do I know the answers to that? You and I will never know the answers to that unless people experiment, and that requires incredible courage and a risk.
It's fascinating how many CEOs and other leaders at the C-suite level really focus their attention on this agenda when they feel the direct impact. So they might go on a stage, even at Davos, and say the right things about this topic. But the reality is, you sort of, when you look under the bonnet, and it's like, it's the same business, the same mindset. And yet it's only when their business is affected either by the geopolitical conflict, a supply chain being disrupted by perhaps a climate shock, and so on, that actually they wake up. And I wonder how, rather than reacting to the shocks that directly affect their business, where could you start? So imagine they're coming back from holiday, right? It doesn't matter whatever time of year, they're coming back from holiday. They have read your book and they say, yeah, I understand all these practices that you just eloquently described, but I just need to make my first step. and I know it will be context specific, but if you had to talk to the generic CEO, you thought, right, I need to just take one step forward just to create some momentum to become a better, a better systemic leader. What steps should they take?
There are so many steps that can be taken, but I think based on what you've just said, which is they've just gotten back from vacation / holiday, depending on what part of the world you're listening to, and you've just read the book, you know you need to do something, but you've just stepped back into your time zone and you're thinking, that feels like such a long time ago. I don't know how to do it. I'd go straight into radical listening and extreme accountability. And it sounds really...
What is radical listening? What does radical listening actually mean in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I remember vividly when I wrote it, is like really, radical listening could be misunderstood as, let's say, Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, and it isn't that. Radical listening is, and I'm going to give a very brief case study, which I don't own, but it was very much in the public domain, which I wrote about in my book, which is when, and I have to say the case study that I'm going to provide is going to either repel people significantly or it's going to help people identify what they can do in their own emotionally intelligent way. So earlier this year in 2025, you may or may not remember when Elon Musk took over Doge, went into government and sent an email out in a very Twitter-esque overtaking mode way. And he went in and he created utter chaos by sending an email out asking for data on what people have done that week. Understandably, because government is not an AI native environment. It's not digital first. It's not an organization that responds to data in the moment or analytics in the moment. Government employees were understandably pretty upset about that. And there was understandably a lot of media uproar. However, his approach was genius. And I know people are going to think that's a terrible thing for me to say, but I'm going to step back a second and explain why I think this is genius. When you're asking thousands of employees to simultaneously outline what it is that they're doing, and ideally, let's use kind of 360 language. What are you doing? What could you do better? What are you most concerned about? Etc. You could potentially have all the data you need, especially when you plug it into an AI system, which you can imagine as Elon Musk is an AI native and he's very focused on his AI solutions. If you're able to put that in there ethically, you're able to find out where the blind spots are, where the opportunities are, where maybe the organization is too heavy in a particular area. But the reality is that, I mean, in Doge, it was a very sensitive and difficult, challenging, traumatic situation at that particular moment in time. But if we were able to echo that concept and put it into an organization that is able to implement AI in real time with OKRs, KPIs, understanding with the organization's ideal focus on where it needs to go and adapt, you're able to, with active listening, be able to gather all the data, see the opportunities, and then make that shift very, very quickly. As you know, David, you've worked in organizations long enough, as have I, to see that when there are culture surveys, etc., it can take months for that data to be provided. Once it is provided, and I've seen this time and time again, the C-suite will inevitably, or not inevitably, invariably look at the data and say, oh, well, they're saying this because of that, without actually realizing that's a signal for a greater opportunity for development and success.
That's a great point. And so I love the scale of inviting direct questions to a large number of people, simple questions, and then mining, understanding it, and mixing it up with other factors, performance metrics. I mean, Charlie Sull was our previous guest, Charlie of Culture X at MIT, who does a lot of work at MIT. There's a link, has done that, and it often calls out some very, very inconvenient truths and blind spots when you do it at scale. When people, you don't quite understand the organization, well, that's what they've just been telling you. This is their words. It's not something I made up. Let's talk a bit more about some other capabilities that are necessary to lead in this particular systemic world that you described. perhaps you've touched on it there, but pattern recognition. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of insight to gather. How do you hone your skills in recognizing the right patterns and which ones perhaps to ignore as well? What would you advise?
Well, I'm going to pull a data point actually from Ludmila Preslova's book, The Canary Code. One of the great things about people understanding patterns is that you can have your human form pattern detectors. Usually people are a little bit on the neurodivergent side. I just want to also put a disclaimer out there that I am neurodivergent, so I see patterns very, very easily. It's an exhausting, painful experience that I have, but when I see those patterns, I like to be able to jump in and make the change happen really, really quickly. So I'm a human. I'm in human form. Other people need to rely on data analysts, and it's all with their data analysts, as you know, that especially if they're using and incorporating AI into the system. As long as you're able to answer or ask the right question to get the right data, you or I could be using a ChatGPT or a Grok or whatever for that very, very easily. Organizations or data analysts or prompt engineers, they'll do pretty much the same thing. But the pace and the scale, or should I say the pace of being able to get the data in aggregate form is just absolutely phenomenal. It's a fascinating, fast-paced way of doing things versus, and this is where it gets a little bit challenging, too often when we rely on maybe an outlier within the organization to provide data, it's a sample of one. And too often we don't listen to that sample of one when they are the one waving the red flag saying, hey, this is an issue, because maybe they're brave enough to be able to do that. Whereas I think AI will be a leadership multiplier in that particular sense.
You've touched on it in that response and other comments you've made. And also in the book, there's a heavy emphasis on the neuro aspect of leadership, if I can call it that. And you refer to beyond what are called loose definitions of emotional intelligence and so on, which I find frankly a bit flaky often. But you talk about, for example, nervous system regulation. And I think to many listeners or viewers, they might think, I've heard about that, but how does that relate to, the shocks that we need to deal with and the call to action in terms of leaders? How do you bring the two together?
One of the challenges when using nervous system regulation or emotional intelligence is that it feels very abstract. One of the people that created a game-changing book for me, which made me want to take this particular route and explore it very deeply. His name is Nicholas Gianni. He wrote Leader as Healer, and his book in the UK, I think it was in 2022, was Business Book of the Year. A book about healing, Leader as Healer. And he goes down the path of understanding or explaining how our nervous system is wired, how our body communicates. And I'm sounding like a hippie now, I do apologize. But you get that feeling in the stomach. You get this feeling in your body, and it will impact our decision-making abilities. It will put us into, and he doesn't quite use this language, I don't recall, but I use it, as you know, because you read the book, which is related to, I should say, Stephen Porges' book about polyvagal theory. And here we're talking about 4 fundamental states that we are in when we're not in a calm state where we're able to be creative. If we're not able to be creative, to be collaborative and to problem solve. If we experience or we note a perceived threat, and it could be relating to any of the tridimensional traumas that may come either from the top down, from the bottom up, or from all of the different external traumas, it puts us into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So in the book, I have avatars. these CEO
Yes.
avatars.
Brilliant.
And
Yeah, they're brilliant.
thank you. And with those avatars, I have a case study, a very basic grid on how each avatar behaved during 9/11, the economic crisis, and the pandemic, and how if they had worked on their nervous system regulation, they could have shown up differently. Then I go a step further in the book, as you know, because you read it, which is that if you take into consideration the kind of trauma or the response or because I call it a simulation, which is that when we are communicating as a CEO, let's say I'm a CEO for a second, and as a CEO, I am explaining to my team, this is what needs to be done. This is how it needs to happen in whatever way. Based on their own operating system in their mind, their own nervous system, they may interpret, or should I say, misinterpret. They will probably misinterpret what it means. And that's why in quarterly reviews, annual reviews, people don't get the great reviews because they're running on fumes. They're burning out. They're not understanding. They're not able to adjust and adapt fast enough. So I put all of these different avatars of the employees together. So an individual, a CEO, is able to see how their persona, how their avatar impacts each of the others within the organization, and how they overcompensate, or are they distracted, they're avoidant, they bully, there are all sorts of behaviors that show up. So putting all of that together, we have to, and I'm sounding very bossy right now, but we have to understand our nervous system, how we react, how we show up, and it isn't a case of masking or playing a role. It's understanding that actually our internal nervous system is driving us, that is impacting the way that we communicate with our people and the results that we're able to essentially get at the end of the day.
What you've described is properly deep work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for some people, particularly in more mercenary or traditional incumbent organizations,
Mm-hmm.
they might have considered it soft, fluffy for the HR department or for the people who are not as successful.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might have read about it and thought, yeah, not for me. I mean, that's a radical shift in how you think about yourself and how you show up and what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm always interested in how you either nudge or shove people forward in sort of small moments.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine a person listening thought, actually, God, I'm that person. I've been running on fumes. Yet I just don't know how to refresh myself, rewire myself. Talk to me about the steps. Is it work they do on their own? Do they need support? Who do they reach out to try and help? Apart from you, of course, directly. That's the pitch. But how do they start making some changes in this area?
I think they would have had warning signs, relationship problems, maybe problems with substances, workaholism.
Yes.
All sorts of symptoms where people are saying to that particular individual, hey, you're working too hard, or you're neglecting this, or you seem to be very ill right now. So let's say you've got a lot of sicknesses that just keep coming along because your immune system isn't working as well as it could have done, because guess what? We were younger once and we could bounce back very, very quickly. But the older we get, the wiser we become. And then we realize, usually much later, how those behaviors impacted us and prevented us from then being able to continue at that same pace and that same level. So putting all that aside, let's just say for a second that we didn't have a climate crisis. Let's say AI was being handled in a way where everybody was very excited about it, and everybody's lives were going to be well sorted, and we all had a universal basic income already laid out, and we're feeling like we're living in the ultimate nirvana. If that's the case, fantastic. We don't need to worry about those things. But guess what? we'll always be worrying about something. Those traumas, our addictions will always be there because that's our coping mechanism. That's how we handle the stress that is driving us forward. Therapists, for example, I'm going off on a tangent now, but therapists, during pandemic, everybody needed a therapist, but the wait list for therapists at that time for people to be able to handle their challenges was too long. They had to wait for a year in some instances. Similarly, if people have addictions, or let's say something traumatic happens, to wait for 3 months because you've just been diagnosed with cancer, you've just had a car accident, or your home has been burned down, and you can't get in front of medical or mental health help. All of those things compound our ability to work effectively and to be productive. And when your brain is moving or needing to go into survival mode with those other aspects, how can you possibly perform? And one of my great realizations when I was doing MIT's course, essentially it was for ESG, but then they called it business sustainability. How can you sustain a business when the organization is full of people that are in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode because of everything that's going on? So as you can tell, I have a sense of urgency about this, because this isn't a nice to have situation. We're the rate of stress, loneliness, and inability to be able to collaborate effectively because people feel like their jobs are on the line. They may not necessarily have that longevity. They don't know whether or not their homes can even be insured in the not too distant future. It's a very, very challenging time right now.
What you're talking about, I guess, is, and you talk about in the book, is how to redesign and reapply the operating system of leadership, because you painted a picture of existing and future systemic shocks that frankly are either very immediate because you feel it personally, maybe in your family, community, organization, or they are, you have a fear about implications. And at the same time, you have your own internal challenges, issues to deal with, i.e. you've got the wrong way of approaching it. And it's a double whammy. I'm mixing metaphors.
Yeah,
but so forgive me for that.
I love it.
But I'm interested in starts and shifts, as you know. And there is a typical approach for a new leader in their first 100 days to follow. Not saying it's all wrong, but when I read your 100-day list, I thought, wow, that's a different take. Just give us a flavor of how your approach for the 100 days of a new leader contrasts and compare with a more traditional approach. What would you call out?
Well, first of all, I want to give Michael Watkins a nod. A
great man. And another guest.
Exactly. You've been bringing on the best guests. So Michael Watkins, I met him at the same time that I met Nicholas Jarney at Thinkers 50 a couple of years ago. And I went up to him and I said, Michael, great fan. Congratulations on getting Book of the Year, Thinkers 50. And I usually know I have 30 seconds with somebody. So I asked him a direct question. Why is it that CEOs won't acknowledge and understand and incorporate 100-day programs with all of their staff, all of their employees when they first come on, and whenever there's a new change in the organization? And his reaction was very telling. And I would say, I have to be careful with my words that I use. We both decided that we should create a Harvard Business Review article for it. So I was about to start writing a Harvard Business Review article, and this was 2023, and that's when I got on the phone to various people that I know and said, "Okay, I've got a book idea. But there's also this article that I'm supposed to be doing with Michael Watkins. No, I'm just going to focus on the book idea." So that. He actually started the rush of me realizing and validating that CEOs need to understand this entire shift. So back to your question. His 100 days or first 90 days is exquisite piece of management thinking, as you well know. The language that he uses, which is, imagine you're a new employee, you're like a liver that has just been transplanted into a body, and you need to ensure that you're giving the body all of these anti-rejection medications to ensure that the liver isn't rejected. So that's the reality. And you will have that whether or not it's a new hire, whether it's a new initiative, and whether or not it's, let's say, something that's happening and everybody goes into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So I strongly believe, and I'm not going to make any friends by saying this, I strongly believe every CEO needs to fundamentally understand their internal operating system. So in 100 days, doing a very, very significant deep dive, most organizations or most leadership coaches will say this is a 2-year process based on the fact that we've got, and I'm going to drop a mic here, which is that we have a very short amount of time from a permafrost melt situation to right the carbon situation on our planet. So I'm using that same sense of urgency that I have, because the planet is warming up at a steady pace, but our leadership, we're relying on our leadership, our CEOs, to be the change that we need to see in the world, because we're unable to rely on governments. And there's the geopolitical landscape is just too fraught to be able to rely on those grown-ups to be able to do it. So why don't the CEOs do it? And if it's 100 days, as you know, David, I have a 100 days of movement group. People can do really amazing things in 100 days if they set their mind to it.
Yes, yes.
And it's a remarkably short amount of time when they put the work into it. So in that 100 days, it's a nervous system reset. It's understanding basically every single 11 days or 10 days, there's a different stage that they need to go through. So they're able to understand their operating, I've already said operating system, but they're able to understand how their influences from a young age is impacting where they are and how they respond to crises right now, how they communicate with other people, their biases, how they respond to challenges, and basically rewire and to reinvent that particular individual so they're able to move forward with the level of confidence. So they're not waking up at 2:00 in the morning, wondering what's whether or not they're doing the right thing. There's always going to be a level of stress. This is part of the human experience, but in general, it's just absolutely crucial. I believe, and that's why I wrote the book, that CEOs go through this level of deep reinvention. So they can be the heroes that their children, their family, employees.
I guess it's increasing the odds of them being able to
survive,
collate, process, interpret, and then make very, very wise, important decisions in the here and now and in the longer term. Without it, they may be still doing some of that, but they'll be missing lots of things or ignoring other aspect, inconvenient truths, or frankly taking a more narrow view of the world or their organization, say more short-term rather than long-term, or more industry-based rather than ecosystem.
100%. It's fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. And it feels for many that it's too much for somebody to do and that they won't have time to be able to do it, and that it's
all about priorities, isn't it? It's all about priorities. I want to keep on this theme, but focus a little bit more about you now, because you have, as I know, and you've described in the book, you've reinvented yourself a number of times, and brilliantly so. There'll be a number of people listening who might think, I get it. I know I should do it, but I am tired and I'm exhausted, and I've reinvented myself before. I just want a more peaceful life. What could you say to them from your own experience that would help them have another go? What have you learned that they could learn from?
Ooh, what have I learned? Well, I'm a bit of a reinvention junkie, because as you know from reading the book, I relocated from the UK to Singapore when I was very young. So I'm just used to doing something new every 3 years. but in terms of other people to be able to find the courage to be able to do something different. Imagine being where you are now in exactly the same space in 365 days time. Do you really want to live with that reality?
That's a great question.
That's the only question to ask oneself. And often I, whenever I ask myself that question, I go, oh God, no, I need to do something about this. And that's why I wrote the book. That's why I do a lot of the things, because I'm just unable to sit with myself with that reality.
That's great framing. I love that. Who inspires you the most in terms of the leaders who are actually doing what you described? Give us a few examples that people can go and look up, learn more about.
That's a good question. Who inspires me? I think it's not necessarily actual leaders. I think I think it's more of a mindset. When I hear that somebody has taken a risk to do something new, very new, and just do something so fresh, so new, because they know deep down that a market needs it, an individual needs it, and it just breaks from their traditional, let's say, way of working or the way that they've been doing things. And you just do a double take and say, how did you decide that you were going to do that? And then you hear their story. That to me is where that's where the really courageous leadership, comes in.
Oh, I love that. Yes, I love that. And what's your biggest superpower?
What's my biggest superpower? Oh, I see things, which I know sounds a little bit spooky and a bit weird, but I'm a pattern. I recognize patterns. I'm a pattern recognition hunter. I love spotting trends before they become trends. I read and I listen to a lot of information. I've actually turned the news off since January for the simple reason that I was finding it was a bit of a depressive.
Yes.
Instead of it actually enabling me to be optimistic and to try and find solutions. But I think my superpowers is that. And too often I find myself missing out, and you're going to laugh at me, David, missing out on really long-term business opportunities because I'm able to work with my clients really, really quickly. And I say, okay, guys, we're done. You just need to keep doing what you're doing here. Bye.
Yeah. Well, that's a pricing question, isn't it? That's a value question. Mm-hmm. And what's your biggest weakness?
My biggest weakness is that I talk too much. I talk too fast. I am very, very pushy, and I'm very fast-paced, often too fast-paced.
Interesting. You called out, just an observation. You called out one superpower, and then you called out 5 weaknesses. So, but at a more philosophical level, before this is not a performance review.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. At a more philosophical level, what is the impact you're looking to have on the world around you through your work?
From a philosophical level, I mean, for me, if I hadn't written this book, I would have done myself a huge disservice. I am hoping that the impact that the book will have, if 1,000 people read it, and I've changed 1,000 CEOs' ability to find a new way of operating so they can go home at the end of the day and feel relative satisfaction, to feel joy, may be too strong a word, but to feel, joy that they're actually doing something right in the way that they're understanding themselves, how they operate within the environment and the people around them, and they can feel satisfied with that. That would be a very, very satisfying thing for me.
That's wonderful. And I can see you doing that. And if you're having your best day, everything's going well, you're performing at your best, you're in flow. Gosh, look at me. What are the habits that help you do that?
Sleep. Sleep is so crucial. I must sleep. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I like to go to bed at 8:30 at night because I wake up anywhere between 3 and 5 in the morning to write. That's when my brain is just in flow. So early night, and I'm able to write or do something very creative with either words or new aspects, new learnings, something that I can actually communicate with my clients about. Those 3 hours, it's like the golden time of the day before life becomes really noisy, when my adult kids require me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But also I like to coach for quite a number of hours every single day. But I love to writing and actually doing podcasts, having conversations with people, seeing people evolve. That's and eating very well, eating very clean food, and exercising every day. That's my ideal day.
But you don't go out in the evenings effectively. You go to bed very early, which is impressive. I need to take a leaf out of your book. But Els van der Helm, who's another guest on the podcast, who's a sleep expert, would be loving all of this part of the conversation, I'm sure more. Look, this has been riveting. It's been stimulating. It's been challenging. We've just, I guess, given people a bit of a flavour and a taste of your work and your book. Where can people find out more about you online?
People can go to my website, www.theforward.co. Also, I'm on LinkedIn at Caroline Stokes, and I'm on X at Caroline Stokes.
Controversial move again, but you like being controversial in a good way. Look, one thing I'd say is at the back of the book, there is a fantastic list of resources, books for us to read or reread. And I commend listeners or viewers to check that out. That's quite rare, actually. Not many books have that. Okay. But Caroline, what a great conversation. What a great book. What an important purpose of your work. And I commend you for that. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Likewise. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. If you're feeling especially generous, give us a 5-star rating, sign up to the YouTube channel, to the podcast, and let's give thanks to Caroline again.
Thank you so much.